The red light of the NBA All-Time Greatest special program came on, and ABC's famous host David Anderson felt himself sweating. The format of the program was simple. Two legends of basketball history, Michael Jordan and LeBron James, would sit across from each other and evaluate one another. But just 30 minutes before the program started, Jordan's assistant came backstage with shocking news. Michael wants to make it clear today, LeBron could never have succeeded in the NBA of the 80s and 90s. Anderson had to hurriedly change the written script. Now as he opened the program, his throat was tight. Ladies and gentlemen, today you will witness a historic confrontation. The cameras first showed Jordan, confident, with a slight smile. Then they turned to LeBron. His face had an unreadable expression. The small black box in his hand hadn't escaped anyone's notice.
Welcome to the Famous Stories channel. If you're curious about unknown and never-before-heard truths, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like our videos.
David Anderson, 48, was a respected figure with 25 years of experience in sports journalism. He had studied journalism at Princeton, started his career at a local newspaper, then worked at ESPN and Fox Sports before becoming the host of ABC's flagship sports programs. Anderson was known for his balanced approach, detailed research, and the genuine connections he built with athletes. This program could be the pinnacle of his career, or it could turn into his worst nightmare. The NBA All-Time Greatest program had been planned months in advance. Producer Sarah Mitchell had spent nearly a year negotiating to bring together the two giants of the basketball world. The original purpose of the program wasn't to create controversy, but to have the two great players evaluate each other's careers. However, the last-minute change had turned everything upside down. Michael Jordan, 59, still looked extremely fit. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, and his characteristic confidence was reflected in every movement. He had won 6 NBA championships, 5 MVP awards, made billions of dollars through his deal with Nike, and become the owner of the Charlotte Hornets. Jordan was one of the most iconic figures not just in basketball history, but in sports history. LeBron James, 38, was still one of the NBA's most dominant players despite approaching the final years of his career. He wore a black suit and burgundy shirt. He had won his most recent championship with the Lakers jersey, been selected MVP 4 times in his career, and was known for his activism on social justice issues and his success in the business world. James was considered by many to be the greatest basketball player of all time after Jordan, or according to some, even surpassing Jordan. The GOAT, greatest of all time debate between the two legends had occupied the basketball world for years. Both players had generally made diplomatic statements on the subject, showing respect for each other. However, in recent months Jordan had begun to speak more openly in several interviews. Before the program began, producer Mitchell spoke with both sides one last time. "Gentlemen, we want this to be one of the most important television moments in basketball history. Be honest, but please maintain a framework of respect." Jordan nodded. "I'm always honest, Sarah. I don't do it any other way." James just smiled. "Don't worry, it will proceed professionally." Anderson heard the director's countdown 3, 2, 1 in his earpiece and turned to the camera. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Anderson. Welcome to the NBA All-Time Greatest special program. Today you will witness an unprecedented meeting in basketball history." The camera showed the specially designed seating arrangement in the center of the studio. Anderson's chair was in the middle, Jordan to the right, James to the left. In the background, photos from the two players' careers and iconic moments from NBA history were displayed. On my right, 6-time NBA champion, 5-time MVP, Chicago Bulls legend Michael Jordan. On my left, 4-time NBA champion, 4-time MVP, today's most dominant player LeBron James. "Gentlemen, thank you for this historic program." Both players nodded. Jordan had a slight smile on his face. James looked more serious. Anderson directed his first question. "Michael, what's the biggest difference between your era and today's NBA?" Jordan leaned forward. "The physicality of the game, David. In our time, basketball was much tougher. Hand-checking was allowed. Think about the Pistons' Bad Boys team. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, Dennis Rodman. These guys would come onto the court to tear you apart. Today, if you touch a player hard, you get a technical foul." Anderson nodded and turned to James. "LeBron, do you agree with this assessment?" James looked thoughtful. "Every era has its own challenges. Yes, the game was more physical back then, but today the game is much faster, much more athletic, tactically much more complex. Everyone shoots three-pointers. Everyone can dribble. The boundaries between positions have disappeared. Anderson wanted to delve deeper into the topic. Michael, you made an interesting statement before the program. You think LeBron wouldn't have been successful if he had played in your era. Can you give a bit more detail on this? There was a silence in the studio. The cameras zoomed in on Jordan. The camera crew was ready to capture James's reaction as well. Jordan smiled, with his characteristic confidence. Look, LeBron is an amazing athlete. He's dominant in today's game, but in our time, with that physicality, that pressure defense, think about it, you're playing against the Detroit Pistons, and they're taking you down every time you go for a layup. Or against the New York Knicks, facing Patrick Ewing's blocks, Charles Oakley pushing you at every step. This was a completely different game. Jordan paused for a moment, then continued, also in our time teams were built around certain players, you were the star of your team, and everything revolved around you. Today players come together to build super teams. I never wanted to team up with my rivals to beat them. I wanted to beat them. The last sentence was clearly a reference to James going to the Miami Heat to build a super team. The tension in the studio increased even more. Anderson turned to James. LeBron, how would you respond to this assessment? James, maintaining his smile, put the small black box he was holding on the table. First of all, I have endless respect for Michael. He was an inspiration to me growing up. I had Air Jordans, I hung his posters on the wall. I don't think this discussion should be personal. James opened the box and took out a small USB drive. However, we need to remember that basketball is a science, and everything can be measured. Numbers don't lie. Anderson was surprised. What is this, LeBron? If you'll allow me, I'd like to show you, said James. Could I ask your technical team to connect this to the main screen? Anderson looked at the producer. Mitchell nodded, and a technician quickly took the USB and connected it to the computer at the back of the studio. A few seconds later, a presentation opened on the large screen in the studio. I did special research with the Basketball Analytics Institute, James explained. We examined all the data on players throughout NBA history and different periods of the game. James began to advance the presentation. First, the issue of physicality. Yes, there was hand-checking in the 80s and 90s, but today's players are much more athletic. The average vertical jump was 28 inches in 1990. Today it's 34 inches. Players are much faster, much stronger. Jordan shifted slightly in his chair. His expression hadn't changed, but the look in his eyes had become attentive. James continued. Second, the numbers. In the 1990s, teams would score an average of 100 points. Today, this figure is over 110. The tempo is much faster. There are many more three-point shots. Tactically, the game is much more complex. Anderson interrupted. These numbers are interesting, LeBron, but the question is, how would you have adapted if you had played in Michael's era? James moved to another slide on the screen. This is where things get interesting. The Basketball Analytics Institute took my physical characteristics and playing style and simulated them in the NBA of the 1990s. On the screen appeared a detailed model analyzing James's body structure and movement style according to the defensive rules and game tempo of the 90s. According to this simulation, I would have been a dominant player in the NBA of the 90s as well. My physical build would have given me an advantage against hand-checking. It's not easy to hand-check against a player who is 6'8" tall and weighs 250 pounds. Jordan laughed slightly. Simulations only work in theory, LeBron. They don't reflect the challenges you face in real life, on the court. James looked directly at Jordan, making eye contact for the first time. You're right, Michael. That's why we went further. A new video started on the screen. This video shows how I react to physical contact even in today's defensive rules, from games I've played. The video showed various moments from James's career, experiencing hard contact against the Detroit Pistons, struggling against Boston Celtics defense, slipping through heavy defenses and going to the basket. You know, Michael, there's physical play in my era too. Maybe the rules have changed, but players are still tough. Ask Draymond Green, ask Steven Adams. There are still guys who come onto the court to tear you apart in today's game. Jordan nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. Physicality is just one part of the game. But we faced this every night. Every game was a battle. James moved to another slide in the presentation. This time there was an analysis table on the screen. We prepared this with basketball historians and analysts. We evaluated the most challenging periods in NBA history. Physicality, athletic level, tactical complexity, intensity of competition. We measured every factor. The table showed the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s side by side. Each period was evaluated in different categories. As you can see, the 80s and 90s stand out in physicality, But the 2010s and today are much more advanced in athletic level and tactical complexity. When the total difficulty index is calculated, all periods are very close to each other. Jordan still didn't seem convinced. Numbers don't tell the whole story, LeBron. Being on the court, experiencing that moment, feeling the pressure, these things can't be measured. James nodded. You're absolutely right. That's why I brought something else. He took his phone out of his pocket and dialed a number. A FaceTime call opened on the large screen in the studio. Isiah Thomas appeared on the screen, the leader of the Detroit Pistons Bad Boys team, one of the most ruthless rivals of Jordan's era. "Hello, Isiah," said James. "Can you hear us?" "Yes, I can hear you," Thomas replied. "Hello, LeBron. Hello, Michael." The expression on Jordan's face changed. The historic rivalry and tension between him and Thomas was well known in the basketball world. Rumors that Jordan influenced Thomas's exclusion from the Dream Team were still being discussed. Anderson was also surprised. This turned out to be an unexpected development. James turned to Thomas. "Isiah, I wanted you to evaluate two different periods of basketball history. You both played in Michael's era and closely followed my career. Can you compare these two periods?" Thomas looked thoughtful. "Every era has its own challenges. We played a physical game in the 80s and 90s. That's true. The rules were different, but today's players are incredibly athletic and talented in every position. LeBron, your physical build and game intelligence would have made you dominant in our era as well. Michael, your competitiveness and skill would carry you to the top in today's game too." Jordan interjected. "Isiah, in our era, when players were in contact, fouls weren't called immediately like they are today. That's a huge difference." Thomas nodded. "Yes, the rules have changed, but players always adapt. Think about LeBron's physical build, Michael, 6'8" and 250 pounds. I wouldn't want to defend against him, with or without hand-checking." James opened another video on the main screen in the studio. This one showed moments from Jordan's era, when the Detroit Pistons applied their defense strategy known as the Jordan rules. "Michael, you played great against this defense and eventually beat them. It was an amazing achievement," said James, "but the question is, could I have been successful against the same defense?" "Isiah, what do you think?" Thomas replied from the screen. "We had developed a special defense to stop Michael, but LeBron is a different player. His physical strength and passing vision could have neutralized our strategy. To be honest, we would have needed to plan a completely different defense against LeBron." Jordan smiled slightly. "Isiah, we fought a lot against each other, but in the end I won the championships." Thomas also smiled. "Yes, Michael, and that proves your greatness, but every era has its own champions. LeBron is also one of the best of his era." James moved to the next slide on the screen. This was a graph comparing the careers of the greatest players in NBA history according to various metrics. "Look, this discussion shouldn't have a winner," said James. "Each of us dominated the game in our own era. Michael, you made history with your competitiveness and desire to win. 6 finals, 6 championships. That's an incredible achievement." Jordan nodded, as an expression of thanks. James continued. "I struggled with different challenges in a different era. A more global game, a faster tempo, social media pressure. Every era has its own challenges." Anderson interjected. "At this point it seems like an interesting consensus is starting to form. Michael, do you agree with LeBron's assessment?" There was a silence in the studio. Everyone was waiting for Jordan's answer. Jordan smiled with his characteristic competitive look. "LeBron is a great player, no doubt about it. He's accomplished incredible things throughout his career. And yes, I have 6 championships, 6 finals MVPs. I never lost in the finals. LeBron has some finals losses in his career." These words increased the tension in the studio again. The expression on James's face didn't change, but the look in his eyes intensified. "Michael, I respect that," said James, "but success isn't measured by championships alone. Throughout my career, I've been successful with different teams, different coaches, different systems. I brought championships to 3 different franchises. That's not easy either." Jordan nodded. "Of course it's not easy, but I stayed in Chicago and built a dynasty. I changed not just the history of the Bulls, but the history of basketball. I made the NBA a global brand." Anderson wanted to deepen the discussion further. "What about playing styles? Michael, you're known primarily as a scorer. LeBron is known as both a scorer and a creator. What do you think about this difference?" Jordan leaned forward. "I wasn't just a scorer. I was selected to the all-defensive first team 9 times. Scoring wasn't the only statistic I led the league in. I was a complete player." James nodded. "Michael was definitely a complete player. I've also tried to develop every aspect of my game. We have different playing styles, but we both tried to do whatever it took to make our teams win. The atmosphere in the studio had begun to change. The initial tension had been replaced by a more constructive dialogue. The two legends had begun to recognize each other's achievements. However, Jordan maintained his competitive spirit. Still, it's easy to talk about the challenges of playing in my era. You can't know without experiencing it. James smiled and pulled a small notebook out of his pocket. Actually, Michael, I completely agree with you on one thing. You can't know without experiencing it. He opened the notebook and showed it to Jordan. These are notes I've kept throughout my career. I take notes for every season, every practice, every game. And you know what I noticed? The periods I struggled the most were when I faced the toughest defenses. Jordan looked at the notebook, which contained match analyses, opponent evaluations, and game strategies. It showed how detailed James worked. "This is impressive," said Jordan, looking genuinely impressed. "I always valued details too." James closed the notebook and put it back in his pocket. "Michael, I know what you said before this program started. You think I couldn't have been successful in your league. I respect that. But I also want to tell you something." Everyone in the studio held their breath. James continued, looking directly at Jordan. "I could have played in your league, and you could have played in my league with the travel schedule, under social media pressure, in this environment where every move is analyzed, because we're both not just the best of our eras, but two of the greatest basketball players of all time." Jordan looked into James's eyes. For a moment there was complete silence in the studio. Then, unexpectedly, Jordan extended his hand. "Maybe you're right, LeBron. Maybe each of us was the best in our own era." James shook Jordan's hand. This moment would become one of the most iconic frames in basketball history. As Anderson prepared to end the program, Jordan added one more thing. "But still, if we played one-on-one, I would win." Jordan also laughed. "I'm getting a bit older, but I can still show a move or two." As the program ended, Anderson made his closing speech. "Today we witnessed a historic moment. Two legends, two different eras, two different perspectives. Maybe there is no answer to the GOAT debate. Maybe the beauty of basketball is that it allows different talents to shine in different eras." When the cameras turned off, Jordan and James stood up. They both looked at each other with respect. Jordan put his hand on James's shoulder. "You did a good job, young man. Your presentation was impressive." James smiled. "Thank you, Michael. Hearing that from you means a lot to me." Everyone in the studio was amazed while watching this intimate moment. The tension between the two legends had given way to mutual respect. In the hours after the program aired, social media went crazy. The hashtag Jordan versus LeBron became a worldwide trend. Basketball analysts, former players and fans joined the discussion. But perhaps the most interesting development came a week after the program. Jordan and James announced they would organize a basketball camp together. The camp aimed to teach young people basketball techniques from different eras. "We'll solve this debate on the court," Jordan said at the press conference, with his characteristic smile. "We'll teach young people the best aspects of both the old school and the new school." James nodded. "Basketball is evolving. We should evolve with it. There's a lot I can learn from Michael, and I think there are things he can learn from me too." The basketball world celebrated this unexpected collaboration between the two legends. The GOAT debate hadn't ended. Perhaps it never would. But Jordan and James had chosen to put aside competition and highlight their love for the game and their desire to inspire future generations. This wasn't just the story of two great players, but the story of basketball itself, a game that constantly changes, evolves, but remains the same at its core. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. What do you think about this topic? Please write in the comments below. See you in the next video.